one of the contestants in these races that we are talking about is Reverend Raphael Warnock, and he does highlight the Reverend part of being Raphael Warnock. And why that is newsworthy in this particular case is because not only is he an outspoken Reverend, he is also outspokenly pro-abortion. And just in the last few days, a group of African-American pastors wrote a letter to Reverend Warnock about this issue. And part of that letter is, I'm going to read a little bit here for you. It says, unborn black, brown, and white lives are so much more than clumps of cells, burdensome inconveniences, or health problems. They are sacred human persons endowed by God with inalienable dignity and worth. We implore you to uphold the biblical defense of life and fight against the systemic racism of abortion. Very well said. One of the authors and signers of this letter is Dean Nelson, who's FRC's Senior Fellow for African American Affairs, as well as the Executive Director of the Human Coalition Action. Dean, welcome to the program.
Joseph, great to be with you. Glad to always have these meaningful discussions with your audience.
Well, we are glad to have you. Tell us, why did you feel compelled to write this letter?
Well, one of the reasons, Joseph, is that Pew Research study showed, I guess this is earlier this year, that over 70% of black Americans consider themselves to be conservative or moderate. And so most of the time when we're talking in this political arena, the voice of the conservative African-American, certainly the Christian conservative African-American, is not heard. And so we felt like it was important to be able to have a different voice. And this group of about 27, and that number is growing, of black ministers felt like first step would be, just out of deference to Reverend Warnock, to affirm him for preaching the gospel and for doing some of the things that he's done in his community, but to be very clear that you cannot be consistent with the Bible and say that you are a minister of the gospel, believe the word of God, and support abortion. And so that was really what we wanted to do, and we felt like that not from a standpoint even of politics, but just from the standpoint of a servant of God challenging Reverend Warnock on his position of abortion.
Why do you think he has made such a point of being both a reverend and pro-abortion? And he's taken to Twitter to basically highlight that. I'm a reverend, I'm a pastor, and I support abortion. Why do you think he's trying to merge these two parts of his life?
I think he's trying to do that because, number one, he can't get away from it. That's pretty much all that he has done in his career. And there's nothing wrong with that, of being a public servant, serving in the context of a minister. But secondly, I think that he is trying to grab a hold of the mantle of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. because he is preaching at the church that MLK preached from and used to serve at. And so I think that he's trying to almost borrow from the credibility and the mantle of Martin Luther King Jr., who was not pro-abortion. And so I feel like that those are the reasons that he's doing it, and many black ministers, like those that have signed on to this letter, are not going to let that go without calling him out on these biblical standards.
Now, you've made the point that you don't see these positions being consistent, biblical, the gospel, and abortion. Is Reverend Warnock otherwise orthodox in his faith? My suspicion would be, and I don't know him until he became a candidate for the U.S. Senate. I'd not heard his name, and I don't really know much about his background. But is he otherwise orthodox? Is this an incongruence, or is this part of a larger pattern of incongruity with the Orthodox gospel?
You know what? I am doing my due diligence to find out. I want to give deference to Reverend Warnock. I do know friends who have preached in his church who hold biblical positions just like you and I do. I have obviously, since the letter, we want to see if there's an opportunity to sit down with him. He's participated at events in Georgia with other Orthodox, Christians, people that hold to the views that you and I do. So I think that he's probably trying to have it both ways, but time will tell. But as it relates to the position of life, as it relates to the position of traditional marriage and support for the LGBTQ community. He has made it his business to push that. Something that you are aware of is the Equality Act. He's given clear support for the Equality Act, which would do great harm to our religious liberty. So in terms of his orthodox views, we'll see. But certainly from a political standpoint, I believe that electing him to the Senate would do a lot more harm to those in Georgia than they would if they were to elect Kelly Loeffler.
Now, you have sent this letter. Have you gotten a response from him?
He's not responded directly to us. His press people did respond to the reporters. So we're hoping that we'll be able to hear from him when I'm there in Atlanta with these other pastors this week.
Dean Nelson, Family Research Council, and the Human Coalition Action. Dean, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for your courage in being public on this and taking on what is a very difficult issue. And thank you very much for your time and joining us today.